Night had fallen over New York City, and the grind of the night shift was just beginning. The city that never sleeps seemed to have taken a brief pause, the hustle and bustle replaced by an eerie tranquility. My work location, an old building, sat like a silent sentinel amidst the concrete jungle, its history veiled in mystery. The building was a relic from a bygone era, its walls whispering tales of the past. An unsettling feeling of being alone in this colossal structure always gripped me. It was as if the building itself was a living entity, its silence speaking louder than the cacophony of the day. As I walked through the dimly lit corridors, every echo of my footsteps seemed to bounce off the walls, creating an orchestra of uncanny sounds. The flickering lights cast long, dancing shadows that played tricks on my mind. At times it felt as if the shadows were alive, watching me, their silent observer. It had fallen over New York City, and the grind of the night shift was just beginning. The city that never sleeps seemed to have taken a brief pause, the hustle and bustle replaced by an eerie tranquility. My work location, an old building, sat like a silent sentinel amidst the concrete jungle, its history veiled in mystery. The building was a relic from a bygone era, its walls whispering tales of the past. An unsettling feeling of being alone in this colossal structure always gripped me. It was as if the building itself was a living entity, its silence speaking louder than the cacophony of the day. As I walked through the dimly lit corridors, every echo of my footsteps seemed to bounce off the walls, creating an orchestra of uncanny sounds. The flickering lights cast long, dancing shadows that played tricks on my mind. At times, it felt as if the shadows were alive, watching me, their silent observer. Suddenly the lights flickered and a chill ran through the room, quickly followed by an eerie silence. This was no ordinary night in the heart of New York City. The static hum of fluorescent lights began to give way to an eerie silence. The once familiar office space transformed into a strange landscape, filled with shadows that played tricks on my tired eyes. From time to time the lights flickered, casting the room into momentary darkness. And each time, it felt as if the shadows were growing. A draft of cold air, inexplicable in the New York summer heat, often swept through the room, making me shiver, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. Strange sounds began to fill the silence. That seemed to come from nowhere, the soft noise of something moving in the distance, a low hum that seemed almost alive. Rational thought told me it was just the building settling, or maybe the wind. But deep down, a part of me knew it was the part of me that still feared the darkness, the unknown. That part of me was screaming that something was wrong. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself that it was simply a product of an overactive imagination. I told myself it was the late hours of the night, the loneliness playing tricks on me. But the uneasiness continued to grow, eating away at my sanity, turning every shadow into a lurking threat, every sound into a harbinger of terror. As the night progressed, the incidents escalated, the whispers grew louder, the drafts of cold air became more frequent, and the lights flickered with increasing intensity. The eerie silence was broken only by the strange sounds that seemed to approach me. And then, I realized the undeniable. I wasn't alone. Fear, raw and unfiltered, took hold of me. My heart was pounding in my chest, my palms were sweating, and a chill ran down my spine. I could no longer ignore the feeling that something was very wrong. Little did he know the night was about to get even scarier. Desperate, I decided to check the security cameras, hoping they could provide some logical explanation. He was alone. The only heartbeat in the eerie silence of the night. My heart beat like a drum, the rhythm of fear echoing through the hollow hallways of the building. I headed to the security room, each step echoing through the empty hallways. The room was cold, and the screens projected an eerie glow that seemed unnatural compared to the overwhelming darkness. I sat down, the cold, hard chair a stark contrast to the adrenaline coursing through my veins. My hands shook as I began to review the images. Hour after hour of mundane normality, the absence of anything unusual doing nothing to ease my growing fear. The clock ticked mercilessly, each second dragging on for what seemed like an eternity. I watched as the familiar scenes of my workplace transformed into a strange landscape under the harsh, unwavering gaze of the cameras. The ordinary became disturbing, the mundane became macabre. Every flash of shadow, Every rustle of leaves outside the window became a potential harbinger of the unknown. As I continued to review the images, my anxiety began to transform into a deep, corrosive fear. The camera footage showed nothing out of the ordinary. No spectral figure, no sign of paranormal activity, nothing that could explain the strange events he had experienced. The lack of evidence was disconcerting. The cameras should have offered me solace, a test of reality against the shadows of my imagination. But they offered nothing, and their silence was deafening. But just as I was about to give up, just as I was about to give in to the overwhelming feeling of dread, I saw something that sent shivers down my spine. Something that turned the blood in my veins to ice. Something that made the air around me feel heavy. With a foreboding sense of dread, something was there, lurking in the shadows, invisible to the naked eye but caught by the unblinking eye of the surveillance camera. On the screen in the corner of the room he had just left was a figure that was no ordinary sight. It was a silhouette, a shadow that seemed to defy the very laws of nature. It was humanoid, but it was distorted, spread out in a chilling mockery of the human form. My heart beat against my ribs, a wild drum that echoed the terror that gripped me. I stared at the screen, eyes wide as I tried to comprehend what I was seeing. The figure stood there, eerily still, like a predator watching its prey. His presence filled the room even though he was only on the screen. The air seemed to grow colder, my breath caught in my throat. The figure was in the room he had just left. The room he had just been in, the room I had felt safe in. My safe haven was invaded, contaminated by this terrifying presence. A chill ran down my spine, a cold fear that seemed to seep through to my bones. I was alone, completely alone in this nightmare. The silence of the night shift was broken, replaced by the deafening noise of my own heart beating in my ears. The shock of discovery left me paralyzed, rooted to the ground. I was trapped in this figure's gaze. My mind raced, thoughts swirling like a cyclone. Was this a prank, a glitch in the system? Or was it something else? Something darker, something that defied explanation. I tried to move, to run, to escape, but my legs wouldn't obey me. I was stuck, trapped in this horrible moment. The figure on the screen was the only thing that existed, the only thing that mattered. It was a nightmare come true, a chilling discovery that threatened to consume me. I froze with fear, not knowing what to do next when suddenly the figure began to move. As I watched the figure, it turned towards the camera and I realized with horror that it was not just any figure. My blood turned ice cold as the shocking identity of the dreaded apparition hit me like a bolt from the blue. It was none other than my predecessor, the one who had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only whispers of the eerie and the unexplained. A wave of terror seized me, more potent than anything I had ever experienced. The world around me seemed to spin as I grappled with the horrifying truth. His hollow eyes stared back at me from the screen, a spectral echo of a man who was no more. His pallid face, twisted in an eternal gasp of terror, was a chilling testament to his unspeakable fate. My heart pounded in my chest like a war drum, echoing the rhythm of my escalating fear. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, to escape the suffocating horror that was closing in. Yet, I was rooted to the spot. My gaze locked on the ghostly figure that continued to haunt the screen. The air seemed to grow colder, the shadows deeper. A sound, half groan, half scream, tore itself from my throat. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated terror. A sound that echoed the chilling truth of my discovery. I was sharing my workspace with a restless spirit, a tortured soul trapped in an endless loop of fear and despair. Summoning every ounce of courage I had left, I tore my gaze away from the screen. My feet moved of their own accord, propelling me towards the exit. I could feel the spectral eyes boring into my back, a chilling reminder of the macabre secret I had uncovered. In the dead of night, I fled the building, leaving behind the haunting figure and the chilling secrets it held. The night air was cold against my skin, but it was a welcome relief from the oppressive dread that had gripped me. As the building faded into the distance, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was leaving behind more than just a job. I was leaving behind a piece of my sanity, forever scarred by the terrifying truth of the night shift. As the sun rose, I found myself unable to shake off the events of the night. The first light of dawn did little to dispel the darkness that had settled in my soul. The echoes of the horrifying night clung to me, like a grim specter refusing to be exorcised. In the aftermath of that night, I found myself grappling with an unseen enemy. It was not just the tangible terror that had unfolded before my eyes, but the psychological torment that followed. Every shadow held a menace, every creak a threat. The world, once a familiar place, had transformed into a canvas of fear. I was no longer the person I was when I first walked into that building. I was a shell, hollowed out by the horrors I had witnessed. The struggle to come to terms with the events was a battle fought on two fronts. On one hand, there was the practicality of having to explain the inexplicable. How do you describe a night of terror in the sterile language of police reports and insurance forms? On the other hand, there was the internal struggle, the quest to reconcile the world as I knew it with the unfathomable darkness I had come face to face with. In the end, my decision was clear. I could never return to that building. The memories it held were too grotesque, the fear too paralyzing. The job that was once a source of income had become a symbol of terror. I would rather live in penury than return to that fortress of fear. And so I leave you with a warning. Beware the shadows. Beware the quiet corners of the world where the light does not reach. Beware the places where the ordinary morphs into the extraordinary, where the known becomes the unknown, for in those places lurk horrors that defy comprehension, horrors that can shatter the tranquility of your existence. And so, my night shift ended, not with the break of dawn, but with a chilling tale that will haunt me forever.